Hello all, and this video is going to be a little bit of a off-the-cuff recollection of a discussion I had over this past weekend with my brother. We were talking about animation, and he's a lot younger than I am. He's in Gen Z, and it was kind of interesting to hear him, denigrate the cartoons that are on TV today and kind of profess the return to some of the millennial animation that I grew up with. And ultimately, I thought what I really took away from the conversation that I had with him was I was discussing with him about the idea of, this the artwork that we see and people have observed, and these kind of modern cartoons that especially have this sort of undertone of inclusivity and emphasis on the kind of identity nature of recognizing one's distinct quantities, but it's in this sort of denigrating way of, well, everyone's quantities has to be all inclusive together in this sort of way that really dilutes into nothingness, was what I was trying to tell him. And he pretty much agreed with me that basically we were discussing how, cartoons from when I was younger, the sort of Courage the Cowardly Dog, the kind of Cartoon Network remakes and rehash of all the kind of different animes, and also cartoons like Ed, Edd n Eddy. You just had just the wacky Looney Tunes kind of inspired comedy. Even we could even use Looney Tunes as an example as well. The kind of richness and boldness of each character's distinct kind of identity, each quality is actually pronounced to interwoven with the actual identity of the character. It's not suspended from the person. You can literally see the kind of from the kind of from the character's physiognomy. You can kind of deduce what their personality would actually be like, and that's not the case anymore with what I see on Cartoon Network now, where everything's kind of just in this flat, this sort of flat-based, really, I guess you would just say like the kind of like face-based sort of flat character. I'm not going to pretend like I know a lot about art, of course, but this is just something that I've noticed, is that they kind of have this sort of repetition of not really differentiating themselves, and therefore you don't really know anything about their personality unless you actually immerse yourself deeply within the art itself. And even then, I saw this there's a good example I saw on Twitter. There was this clip of, I guess, this performance art, and in between the scenes they literally explained what the social message they wanted to convey through the scene. Well, what's the purpose of art if you're just going to explain to us what the message actually is? And it's just kind of, I suppose, a critique of the direction of where this emphasis on flattening of identity. Obviously there's the take that liberalism and paradoxically can't really handle any sort of qualitative difference, actually, because we have to have this sort of egalitarian subject to rule standard within this global technosphere, that the kind of patronage within your social structures is going to dilute down into just this kind of like flat nothingness. It was kind of interesting to see Biden's administration calling for inclusion, and it's not even this sort of democracy anymore. It's the inclusion of other people's so-called rights. But if it's just all based, if everyone's sort of included, even though that's not really true, there's definitely people who are being expelled. But nonetheless, if inclusivity is the goal here, then ultimately you've achieved nothing, because if everything's just inclusive, then what does it matter? There's no gatekeeping. There's no sort of emphasis on one's own actual qualities, which is what people want to actually be recognized for. They don't just want this sort of standardized recognition that everyone's sharing. They want this sort of direction. They want to be able to compare to others and see how I can improve and how I could give back to the kind of social sphere at large by using other people's experiences and the kind of competitive attitude that man used to be celebrated for, that I think is long departed today, sadly. But I think you could also look at this in the greater culture with music as well. I think the tail end of my sort of older millennial age group was kind of really the last of people having this sort of identity to their music. They had this sort of ownership of this kind of identity with music. It was your music. Now it's these kind of moments that you just capture. You don't physically own any of your music anymore. Therefore, you don't really have an identity with it. The metalheads are making covers of hip hop records and vice versa, and all the genres are kind of meshing together. There is no sort of musical kind of scene kids anymore that really stand out, or like the punk kids who wouldn't tolerate other scenes. And this sort of gatekeeping attitude actually gives people that sort of sense of belonging, I think, that generations prior to us got to enjoy. I don't think that they really realized what they were doing, though. It was kind of more spontaneous, and that kind of the kind of Heideggerian way that he saw being, where you kind of have this endeavor that leads people on this kind of almost dreamlike love and passion and desire to come together and express themselves. I know that sounds really, well, it is Heidegger after all, so we are talking about a kind of poetic diction here, kind of hippie attitude in a way. But I do think that that's actually really important, though. I do think that as I've aged and tried to find scenes and find your own kind of group within culture, as monotonous as this kind of consumer identity that we've all trapped ourselves in, this doesn't curtail the want to actually still interact with each other, even if you think that these are just all these kind of like fallen sort of institutions among you. I still think that the desire to be social is still above all else for me personally. I know that there's a lot of people who probably would go even further and say that I'm being complicit or some sort of attitude like that. I don't really think that that's healthy, though. But nonetheless, I think what I'm trying to really get at is, how can we actually address this sort of art and culture that's, totally flattened and expressed in the lowest common denominator possible to sustain itself, and everything is like kind of revolved around this sort of negation of wanting to make sure that no quantities can be overtaken by actual quality. And I think the problem here is that this is ultimately just a faux path that there's not many people who really will attach themselves to this kind of messaging, because in many ways I'm advocating that maybe these sort of social barriers that minority Americans such as myself have faced in the past actually helped create who we are. And we kind of have this nostalgia act of looking back at our predecessors that brought about this sort of social change that we're always advocating for, and the kind of progressive ilk that constantly sees themselves as progressing for the sake of progressing almost. And I think when we look at something like these sort of identities and folk worship of these sort of rebels that wanted to express themselves, but kind of had to stand up to this sort of authority. And after at least this is how the story goes, that we made inroads, and at least prior times it was sort of seen as this sort of meshing together and kind of a synthesis, and this is America and the kind of melting pot. And even that is starting to fall by the wayside as the confidence continues to erode. I think this is because we intuitively understand that the sort of recognition that we desire and want to give out and exude to others has been totally abstracted away into just nothing but the equation, as René Gagnon would discuss, much like Heidegger and others. They kind of foresaw, even though the postmoderns like Derrida come later, and they have their own sort of agenda. But there was other thinkers coming out of post-World War II who were having different sort of ambitions towards this sort of flattening of culture that could even be seen then. The understanding that we probably aren't going to have any sort of recognition of what it really truly means to be creatures of the environment, or the kind of beast of prey that Spengler would talk about even within his own thoughts on technics as well. We're totally abstracted away from the environment now. We're all in this sort of, I think, digitalized community, and there is the attempt to try to bring back, obviously, how can we reconcile with these sort of things. And that's one of the projects that I've been trying to flesh out, is how do we make use of the internet to kind of navigate together. Obviously there's a lot of intentions, and there's going to be a lot of bad actors, as we've been seeing in the drama lately around the communities, but ultimately we do have to kind of find a way to establish how to put together this kind of lack of inclusion within this kind of inclusive world, to actually look for qualities like, and the kind of honor and integrity that we would want within our kind of politic that we're trying to strive for, instead of constantly feeling cheated or this kind of unsavory attitude. I think a lot of people have a sort of Hollywood mentality about this sort of things in the state of the world. They think that they're going to live to see the sort of heaven on earth that they're imagining in their head, and I think it's much more bleak than that. I think we're trying to salvage and try to keep afloat a kind of historical context for future use for probably other people far down the line from now. And quite honestly, I know that sounds very bleak, but I've said it before. I think actually the kind of love for your kind of love and passion for humanity can actually come from the darkest and bleakest of situations. And so I think that this is all part of actually establishing what kind of politic and ethic that we actually truly stand for in this sort of abysmal vacuous, face-based world where we're trying to, restore kind of, narrative itself, and trying to piece together, beyond just these sort of equations of trying to go about things, these sort of, markets and representation through, if we can just have, a couple more points go in the Latinos' direction in this sort of field, in this STEM mathematics department, then, society's going to be saved, or, whatever the grift may be. It's obviously, fake, and we need to actually get serious about these problems and, address the lack of meaning that's, come from the alienation of quite literally everyone outside of their smartphone. But yeah, this was just a little ramble kind of rant video, I suppose, that I wanted to get out there for you guys since it's been a couple days. Appreciate everyone for watching, but I'll see you guys for the Descartes videos that I'm going to start doing soon.